Intraday low in Tokyo against the yen before comments by Japanese officials saying they'll be more vigilant on their currency's surge helped it pick up again. It's now against the yen at 117.13 against Deutsche Mark at 164.75. The pound, like the dollar, is generally holding its ground against Deutsche Mark as investors speculate whether or not the Bundesbank will cut German interest rates. It's there at 238.64, around a quarter of a pfennig, while against the dollar at 144.85. While in Asia, Hong Kong stocks reached an intraday record high and the Hang Seng has closed up 31 at 6,468 almost. I'll be back in half an hour with more business news. Back to Jill.
Thanks, Gwyn. Now for a look at today's newspaper front pages. And the Times later editions lead with the hope for the implementation of the Vance-Owen peace plan in the next couple of days after the Muslim-led Bosnian government accepted the military aspects of the peace proposals.
The Independent leads on its interview with the Prime Minister, in which John Major claims he rejected Mrs Thatcher's emphasis on the service sector in the 80s and says that Britain needs a bigger industrial base.
The Daily Mail reports that Mr Major risks splitting the Tory party by distancing himself from Mrs Thatcher and her economic legacy.
The Daily Express leads with a call from the Home Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, for TV companies to join the battle against crime by controlling the diet of violence he says they broadcast.
The Guardian carries a claim from a prominent heart specialist who says non-emergency patients are dying because hospitals lack the funds to operate.
The Daily Mirror reports the story of a struggling shopkeeper who was charged £72 by Barclays Bank for a 10-minute talk with the manager.
And finally, The Sun leads with a story that one of its photographers has been wrongly accused of making a racist remark to Nepal's Prime Minister and sparking a diplomatic row. It's 8:15. You're watching the BBC's Breakfast News. This morning's headlines. The United Nations Security Council has called for the deployment of UN forces in eastern Bosnia. The Hillsborough victim Tony Bland has died a month after the law lords ruled that doctors could stop feeding him. And the Prime Minister John Major is to announce plans to make the honours system fairer.
Tonight's panellists joining Peter Sissons at Question Time are Health Minister Dr Brian Mawhinney, Baroness Blackstone, Liberal Democrat Charles Kennedy and Margaret Prosser of the Transport and General Workers Union. That's tonight at 10 o'clock on BBC One. This is BBC Two, bound for our Westminster studio now, where Michael Fairbairn awaits with a summary of yesterday's parliamentary proceedings.
Introduce legislation to ban the importation and the sale of weapons such as these. Yeah. Get these off the streets!
Good morning. A dramatic intervention by a Labour MP illustrates growing concern over violent crime. It happened at Question Time while the Home Affairs Committee prepared for another session of their highly topical inquiry into juvenile offenders. Later in the programme, we'll find out what caused that MP to brandish the knife and what the Speaker thought about it. Also coming up, line-by-line scrutiny of the Private Members Bill to make press reporting more responsible has begun, and the government's latest education bill has cleared the Commons. The Home Secretary's announcement on Tuesday that persistent juvenile offenders are to be locked up in secure training centres has added another dimension to the national debate over youth crime. Yesterday, the Home Affairs Committee resumed its inquiry on the subject by questioning those often caught in the crossfire, the probation officers and social workers. Christopher Bond was there.
On Tuesday, the Home Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, announced the government's response to the public concern about persistent juvenile offenders. He said he hoped to establish a network of secure training centres for 12 to 15-year-old boys convicted of 3 imprisonable offences who had proved unable or unwilling to comply with supervision orders. The proposals have already proved controversial. In a letter to The Times, 7 charities criticised what they called an atmosphere of moral panic on juvenile crime. There was a danger, they said, that the lessons learned about the clear link between juvenile custody and high reoffending rates would be lost. The probation officers and social workers giving evidence to the Select Committee were asked for their views.
Do you welcome the Home Secretary's proposal for a secure training order? Do you believe that it is either a properly measured or even a responsible reaction to juvenile offending? And do you think, to some extent leading on from what Mr. Littlechild said, that there may be a danger of creating in these institutions colleges of crime and places where the things which actually come out of it are more thuggery and buggery, as some people have suggested yesterday?
The history of the last 40 years of short, sharp shocks and approved schools and various other endeavours is that they were not successful either as a deterrent, either in reforming or in rehabilitation. What they did do was take the children out of circulation, out of the community for a period of time, in this case up to 2 years. But what will happen at the end of that 2-year period is they'll go back to the conditions that they left and which contributed in some way towards the offending behaviour. So I and NAPO saw yesterday's announcement as really very, very depressing. We'd certainly hope to be able to influence the debate on what is clearly a very serious problem for the whole of the community.
I'm dreadfully anxious about this dispersal because we'll have 12-year-olds subject to 2-year regimes when their counterparts of 17 or 18 are subject to a maximum of 1 year imprisonment. What kind of justice is that for young people as such? What I worry about is, as we sit here now, in 10 years' time, we'll have 12 and 13-year-olds, as they progress into the 20s, walking along the corridors of Wandsworth Prison as red bands as such. That is utterly predictable based on all the institutional evidence provided by the Home Office and provided by the Department of Health. The evidence is before us. We know these schemes are costly failures, not only for the country, but for ordinary human lives as such.
I don't think there is a Director of Social Services that would not recognise some of the descriptions that have been made of persistent offenders. And I don't think there's a Director of Social Services that would not acknowledge that there are some very young people whom we have difficulty in knowing how best to respond to the way that they behave. I think our concern is that there's insufficient evidence that the solution that's being proposed will actually be effective for that group of young people. And I think we would have liked a considered response and a considered discussion about what sorts of effective measures we can do, building on our best experience and knowledge to meet the needs of what are a very troubled group of people. We wouldn't want to say that there is not a problem. There clearly is, otherwise Kenneth Clarke wouldn't have constituents complaining, as you said. But it's the speed of this solution, when all past evidence has shown that custody doesn't actually work in these circumstances to change the way that people behave long term when they return to the community.
I share my concern about this, that if there was time, and perhaps the 2 years that it will probably take to set these institutions up may give us some time, that we will in fact look back in 5 years' time and have added to the problem of crime rather than helped it diminish, because by and large all you will do is contain that young person for a period of time. And what has to happen...
That may be necessary in some cases.
That may be necessary, but they will then come back probably hardened, more skillful, fitter people who will commit more crime, because unless they change their own behaviour, then you will not change the way they act.
Such an institution as being put forward, I would say, doesn't help us towards safer communities, because all the evidence from all sorts of regimes, be they caring, whatever, if we talk about if you lock people away from their community, where the problems are to begin with, and which they've got to go back to, it makes it worse when they come out. So there might be a period of respite, but it actually makes it worse for the community at the end of the day.
After all that, the acting chairman wanted to know how the centres could be made to work.
How, for example, do you think parents might, or the families, might be constructively used? What sort of contact should there be with families during this 2-year period?
As much as is humanly possible, and that can only be done on a local basis.
Home visits, weekend visits?
Of course, because in fact often young people have very fragmented family lives. The families are often split. But as we know from research from youth treatment centres, people will return like pigeons to what's left of their particular family.
Before calling on Mr. Ashley, we're going to have these units. If your organisations were to recommend particular types of regime or ways of mitigating what you believe to be the worst effects, what would be the key points?
One key point, according to Tad Kubicer, was that the unit should contain no more than 10 or 12 children.
Although there is much talk about discipline, discipline is only worthwhile when it's internalised by the individual and they become self-disciplined. And that means they have to be confronted with their delinquency and its impact on people. And therefore some element of reparation, community work for some part of the time, is an important part of them coming to terms with the impact that their behaviour has on the public.
And I just put a quick list down, what was wrong with the approved schools and their like. The children stayed there too long, the regimes were punitive, they were too large, there were too many kids in them, often in dormitory accommodation. They were distant from families, there was a lot of bullying went on, and there was an unhelpful age mix. And I think that if we're going to learn from the past, let's look again at what went wrong with the shocks and the approved schools and not make the same mistakes again.
In the chamber at Scottish Question Time, an MP gave a graphic illustration of what the police are up against in dealing with violent crime by brandishing a huge butcher's knife. The MP, who was rebuked by the Speaker for bringing an offensive weapon into the chamber, was drawing attention to the knife amnesty organised by Strathclyde Police, in which over 4,000 weapons have been surrendered. Before that, MPs argued about the government's plans for constitutional change, following John Major's pledge during the election campaign to take stock of the way Scotland is governed. The leader of the Scottish National Party asked the Scottish Secretary when a statement would be made and what would be in it, and he had a few thoughts of his own.
Does the Secretary of State not understand that there's a world of difference between increasing the democratic power of the Scottish nation and increasing the personal power of patronage of the Secretary of State for Scotland? Will he undertake to put his proposals against independence in Europe and against devolution in a constitutional referendum of the Scottish people? And if not, why not?
Madam Speaker, the honourable gentleman will need to contain his soul impatience for just a little longer, and then he will find out precisely what our proposals do include. But let me reassure him, there will be nothing in our proposals that will do anything to undermine the integrity of the United Kingdom or Scotland's place in it.
Madam Speaker, does the Secretary of State begin to comprehend that constitutional change is not an end in itself, but a means to an end? Doesn't he understand that 75% of Scottish voters want their own parliament, not for its own sake, but because it frees them to make their own decisions about the future of Scottish water, the future of Scottish local government, and the future of Scotland's railway system? And will he at least try to understand this? Whatever he announces about the stock-taking process next week, unless it frees Scottish democracy from the chains of the Westminster Parliament, it will be decisively and deservedly rejected by the mass of the Scottish people.
Well, Madam Speaker, I know that the honourable gentleman, as a member of that small band, Scotland United, is a great evangeliser on his cause. Indeed, I am indebted to the Scotsmen who point out that Scotland United has a new friend in the redoubtable form of none other than Fidel Castro, the President of Cuba. And on their return from a visit to Cuba, Madam Speaker, the Doughty trio concluded, and I quote, "We had 2 hours with him and he was really interested in what Scotland United was about." And it adds, which is more than we've had from John Smith.
Ridiculous.
Very good. Can my right honourable friend please explain to the House what is this continual obsession by the Scottish Nationalist Party to break up the United Kingdom? Isn't it a fact that united Scotland, England, Wales and Northern Ireland, we are one of the most influential and powerful nations in the world? And fragmented Scotland would become like a big county council. That's not what Scotland wants. That's not what Great Britain wants. We want the Union.
I absolutely endorse every word of my honourable friend. And we on this side of the House are proud not only of what Scotland has derived from the Union, but of the benefits that Scotland has brought to the Union.
Sir David Steele.
Is the Secretary of State aware that if any company had taken as long over stock taking as he has done, it would be in compulsory liquidation?